sort of hard to believe, but 6 weeks ago, I started doing sort of a Bible study on the Sermon on the Mount with our students out at Birmingham Southern. It is currently our only campus where we are on campus this semester because of all of the COVID stuff. And we wanted to make sure that we could gather safely on campus. And so we began with a Bible study centered on the Sermon on the Mount for our Tuesday worship. It seemed like a good use of time, a good thing to sort of focus on in this unusual year of 2020. It allowed me to be nerdy and buy a new book by Amy Jill Levine on the Sermon on the Mount to sort of guide our conversations. Levine identifies the Sermon on the Mount as sort of the signature piece of the Gospel of Matthew. She encourages a close reading of the text, one, so you'll buy her small book, but two, so that we make sure that we're not like the crowd in Monty Python's movie Life of Brian that overhears Jesus giving the sermon and walks away thinking that he said, "Blessed are the cheesemakers." Oh, I'm sure cheesemakers are blessed. To set the stage for the reading that we have in tonight's gospel, it's important to know how we get to where we are. This is early in the gospel. Just before this, in chapter 4, Jesus has made it through the temptation in the wilderness. He's begun his public ministry in the Galilee. He's called his first disciples. He started going around teaching and healing, and people are really starting to take notice. Crowds begin to follow him. And so we get in this passage that Jesus, seeing the crowds, decides to go up the mountain and teach his disciples. Now we know the crowds are still milling around, but the Sermon on the Mount is primarily directed to the followers of Jesus in that moment. And it matters that he goes up a mountain to offer this sermon and these teachings, right? When prophets go up mountains, we think of Moses. We heard all summer Moses going up and down mountains. When you go up a mountain, you are... According to Levine, the sermon, which is really a collection of a lot of sayings that stretches over 3 chapters, is intended to give instructions to the disciples on how to have one foot in the kingdom of heaven and one foot in the world. And more importantly, is instructions for the disciples to realize that the kingdom of heaven is already a reality. And because of that, we should listen closely to what Jesus has to say. The reading tonight is the opening act of the sermon, the Beatitudes, those 9 blessings that serve as a theme for all of what is to follow, and that we will hear echoes of them throughout Jesus's teaching in the sermon and in his other public ministry. And Jesus opens strong with a good word, blessed. We all want to be blessed, I think. I used to know a man that anytime you asked him how he was doing, regardless of what was going on in that moment, it could be the most terrible moment. Everything could be going wrong. His response was always, "I am blessed and highly favored." But we don't have to get too far into the sermon to realize that being blessed in the way that Jesus is talking about it is not necessarily what we might normally think it means. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Levine cautions that we are right to hear a dissonance in these pronouncements of blessing in what Jesus is calling blessed. Jesus is telling us that right now in this very moment, we are blessed, yes. But in that blessing, we also have a responsibility to act. So let's take a look at the first 3 blessings. What does it mean to be poor in spirit? Levine writes that being poor in spirit, those that are poor in spirit, are those people that have enough humility that they do not operate from a sense of pride. They are those who recognize that they are both the beneficiaries of the help of others and part of a system which is designed to pay it forward and to help those whom they can. The poor in spirit are blessed, Jesus calls them blessed, because they can see what many choose not to see, that we are all connected and that we need to act accordingly. Blessed are the meek. This maybe seems particularly counterintuitive in our current culture where the loudest and the strongest usually something that is weak or insignificant. Levine, in looking at other places in the Bible, points out the fact that Jesus describes himself as being meek. And she concludes that what Jesus means at this point is that a meek person is someone with great authority, but one who does not lord that authority over other people. Blessed are those who mourn. This is probably the line that most challenges our understanding of what blessing means in this passage. How can you be blessed if you are mourning? When you are mourning, you are experiencing a significant loss. Levine points to the practice in the Jewish culture of sitting Shiva. To mourn in Judaism is to gather your community of family and friends together. To be able to mourn means that you have people around you that love you, that share in your grief. So you are blessed to mourn because not everyone can. To mourn means that you loved someone. To mourn means that you have the time and the community to stop and miss that person. To be able to truly mourn means that you are blessed to be part of a community that joins with you. Today is All Saints' Day. It's one of the principal feasts in the church. It is a day that we remember the saints that have gone before us. We are often very quick to think of the saints that have found their way into our stained glass windows, onto our calendar of celebrations. But it is also a day that most of us remember those sort of lesser saints, those saints that are closer to us, those people that while they were alive, we were lucky enough to experience in our life and that modeled faith and trust and hope and love. For me, All Saints feels a little bit heavier this year, and it's a little hard to hear Jesus say, "Blessed are you who mourn." In the 2 days since I sent out my Friday email newsletter, where I noted that we were approaching 230,000 deaths from COVID-19, we have now surpassed that and surpassed 231,000 deaths in just that short period of time. 2020 seems to be like a whole year of mourning, right? We're mourning the loss of people. We're mourning the loss of our normal life, the loss of community, of celebrations, of trips. We're mourning the loss of being able to gather as church the way we've been faced with, having to mourn the loss of life to violence, to police violence, to senseless violence. We've mourned the fact that we have mourned the sin of systemic racism in our country. We've mourned the pain of poverty, of sickness, of hatred. This whole year has been about mourning. And we have a lot to mourn. But yet, we are still blessed. Today, on All Saints, we are invited to remember that we are joined together in a community of faithful disciples of Jesus, a community that is not just limited to a geographic location or even to a particular time in history. We celebrate the saints so that we can be reminded that the life of a follower of Christ is never a solitary one. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, each one showing us what it means to be poor in spirit, to mourn in community, to be meek, to hunger and thirst for righteousness, to be merciful, to be pure in heart, and to endure persecution for righteousness' sake. Today, as is the custom on All Saints, we will renew our baptismal promises. We will be reminded of who we are in Christ, what we are called to do, and that we are part of a community that is the church. To live out our baptismal promises is to live into the blessings that Jesus pronounces in the Beatitudes. There will certainly be times in the coming days where it will be a lot easier to forget our call as Christians, to forget the promises made in our baptism. It will be easy to forget to be meek or to be merciful or to be a peacemaker. But we are not called to the easy road. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus makes it very clear to his disciples that all that he has preached and taught about is to equip us to take the hard road, that the gate is narrow and the road is hard that leads to life in Christ, and that there are few who find that path. Our country is filled with uncertainty. I'm filled with uncertainty. I honestly don't know what our country will look like on Wednesday morning. I am certain of one thing at this moment, though, and that is that our call, our work as followers of Christ will be Wednesday morning, regardless of what the outcome of the election is. We as Christians are called today and tomorrow and the day after that to continue to resist evil, to strive for justice and peace, to proclaim the good news of God in Christ. And it's going to take a lot more than a single politician to bind up the wounds of our country. And so our work on Wednesday morning is the same as it is now, and it is the work of the saints and the generations that have gone before us, to step out in the fact that we are blessed because we are poor in spirit and that we understand and see the needs of our community. Blessed that we are meek and do not use our power to lord it over others, but use it instead to help. And blessed that we are able to mourn, that we are able to love, and that we are able to gather around as a community to find out what the next step looks like. Our call is the same. It's the same call that the saints have answered that we celebrate today, and it's the same call that Christians for generations to come will be asked to follow. But thank goodness that we are not alone. We are surrounded by the great cloud of witnesses in the work that we are called to do. And so now I ask you to stand, turning to the renewal of the baptismal covenant.